Mwahahaha. That's not convincing. Hello YouTube. Thank you so much for clicking on one of my videos and joining me on my quest to make my own animated movie. I want to talk about writing villains, because that was the hardest thing for me to overcome in my story writing. I had a clear vision for my hero and what I wanted him to overcome, but I couldn't quite figure out how the villain fits into the hero's internal struggle. I did some writing research, and I did find one approach that really helped me out of writer's block and into a more well-rounded villain. He now feels a little more fleshed out, he feels more believable, and he feels like he's evil for a reason, and that's super important in developing a well-written villain. So without further ado, we're going to talk about villains. Quick disclaimer, there's just one way to go about writing your villain. There are many other ways to write a villain for your story, but this is the way that clicked with me the best for my characters and the themes for my story. However, this part is universal. No good villain is evil for the sake of being evil. Your villain has to challenge the belief or internal struggle of your hero. So that could mean that the villain could be more of an internal antagonist rather than external. Let's take, for example, Disney's Mulan, where Mulan is fighting her false belief of having to hide your true self while still honoring her family. Or it could be an external force, like a classic superhero villain, who challenges your hero to make difficult choices. Your villain should have these three attributes: a clear goal, a motivation, and a moral justification. Your villain is just like your hero. Think of it as two sides of the same coin. If your villain can explain the reasoning behind his actions, then you have a good start to a well-rounded character. 1. A clear goal. So what does your villain want? Does he want power? Money? Safety? Maybe protection? There are many things that we want that are morally neutral, and the things your villain wants may not necessarily be a bad thing. For example, let's take a look at Thanos in the Avengers. He wants less suffering. That's an admirable thing to want. But this is where my two sides of the same coin kind of theory comes in. Thanos wants less suffering, and so do the Avengers. The Avengers believe that in order to minimize suffering in the world, they must be willing to sacrifice their time, resources, and energy to help others. Contrast that with Thanos, who also wants less suffering, but believes that you need to sacrifice friends and loved ones to obtain it. Both sides want the same thing, but how they go about it is where it divides vice and virtue. If you're stuck in writing your villain, but you have a clear goal for your hero, try making the same goal for your villain. 2. Motivation. Once you develop your villain's goal, it will help define the motivation for your villain. What drives your villain to do what he or she does? Was there a wound that happened in his or her past that drives the decisions that your villain is making? What makes these villains memorable is that they challenge your beliefs, not because of how evil they are. And don't be afraid of having your villain be relatable. It's not meant to excuse their actions, but rather it's to explain them. Let's take my story for example. I won't reveal anything in the plot. In my case, my villain character has a similar wound to my hero character. They both go about their situations in different ways. My hero gets challenged and comes out victorious in the end and gains virtue, while my villain refuses to change when presented with challenges, and it ultimately becomes his demise. Also, make sure your villain is given a choice to redeem himself. The reason why the villain always fails is because he refuses to change his ways. Which brings me to step 3, moral justification. This is where it can get tricky. Your villain has to believe that what he is doing is the moral way of achieving what he wants. For example, your villain can be blinded by his or her own self-righteousness. My favorite example of this is in Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. At the beginning of the movie, Frollo was trying to get rid of the Romani people. He killed Quasimodo's mother and was ready to kill Quasimodo as well. But he was stopped via divine intervention and he became conscious of his sin. He wasn't aware of his pride until that moment. Frollo chose the virtuous route and saved the baby. Once again, Frollo is challenged after meeting Esmeralda, and we get that crossroads decision in the song Hellfire. He struggles with his own blinded righteousness and falsely assumes that he is being condemned because of his overly obsessive crush on Esmeralda. Blinded by his own pride, he gave himself the false belief that either he has to marry her or she must die so he doesn't have to deal with his own temptations. Another great detail in this moment was that he was given a choice as well. The song Hellfire gets interrupted when a soldier opens the doors and tells Frollo that Esmeralda has escaped. Frollo had that third option to let her go, but instead he dug his heels in and gave in to his pride, thus beginning his downfall. On the flip side, Quasimodo also develops a crush for Esmeralda. Later he finds out that she was never really romantically interested in him and seems to have set her eyes on Phoebus. Quasimodo was given the choice to either figure out a way for him and Esmeralda to be together, like getting rid of Phoebus, or he could accept her free will and let her go. Quasimodo was able to grow and develop virtue because of the challenge that was presented to him. In summary, if you're stuck on how to go about your villain, you can write your villain to be complementary to your hero. Have your villain be the consequences of not changing or evolving in the way your hero does. I'll go over again the 3 points. Make sure your villain has a clear goal, a motivation, and a moral justification. When in doubt, experiment with having your villain have the same goals as your hero. It might be the formula to help complete your story. Having a strong plot is a consequence of having strong, well-rounded characters. I hope this insight is helpful for writing your villain. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you all in the next video.